President Biden and his team have launched a tactical weapon as they gear up for the 2024 campaign season, and that weapon is Kamala Harris. Per CNN's reporting, the White House is moving to, quote, grow Harris's profile, positioning her center stage as an attack dog against the GOP. Per CNN, quote, Biden aides see their path to victory next year rooted in large part in connecting with Black voters, women, young people, and other groups that tend to respond warmly to Harris.
Well, during a Q&A at the University in Iowa last week, Harris spoke to the existential threat currently facing American democracy. It was a fantastic little word salad that Briahna here has not seen yet, and I'm excited to share it with her. Let's watch.
The nature of democracy there are two sides to it in terms of the nature of it. There's a duality. On the one hand, when democracy is intact, it is incredibly strong in terms of the strength it bestows on the individuals in terms of their rights and their freedoms. Incredibly strong in terms of what it does for its people. On the other hand, it's very fragile. Our democracy will only be as intact as our willingness to fight for it. And so fight we must, and fight we will.
That's my favorite of all time.
In terms of the speech,
I could listen to it all.
In terms of,
I think I'm going to start playing that before I go to sleep.
The number of speeches that Kamala Harris has given, on one hand, they can be really vague and meandering. On the other hand, because of the duality, because there's two sides, they can be really wild. Yeah, I don't know. She.
On the one hand, words.
The thing that strikes me is like.
On the other hand, other words.
What is just really relatable about this is that I think many of us have relied on filler words, like insofar as, in terms of,
right,
and then saying the same thing a couple different ways as filler when we haven't done the assignment. But for the grace of God.
Well, that is a charge at this
not
YouTube
this
show where we talk to each other for 3 hours every day.
Not in this professional context, but in our lives as high school students or college students having to give oral reports or whatever. You know, who has not been in that situation? I think what's really damning at this point with Kamala Harris is that it keeps happening. And is she in kind of a Bush to or Trump fashion, someone who doesn't want to read the binder before going out on stage, doesn't like to be briefed, and that's why she's always giving filler mumbo jumbo? Is she kind of incapable of retaining information?
Speaking off the cuff, she's just not good at it.
Is she surrounded by so many yes people that she's genuinely at this stage, 3 years into the Biden presidency, unaware of how she's coming off, and that these sorts of speeches get her roundly
You think
mocked?
they emperor no clothes her? Like they've shielded her from this criticism the whole time? That'd be very impressive if they have.
The confidence with which she still speaks suggests to me that might be the case. Because at a certain point, wouldn't you just start to be insecure every time you open your mouth and just come off as more rattled than she is? She speaks as though she's dropping incredible truth bombs. That's part of what's so remarkable about it. It's just full-throatedly with your chest saying nothing.
This happened to me. I will admit that this happened to me once. That it's embarrassing, but I'm just going to admit it. I was asked to do an interview on a radio program. I'm not going to say more about it. Hopefully no one could ever find it again. And they said 10 o'clock. And I assumed they meant 10 a.m. the next day. They meant 10 p.m. that night. And so they called me after I'd been at a nice dinner, I'd been drinking a responsible amount, I wasn't driving or going anywhere, but I'd had too much to drink to do a radio interview, for sure. I thought it was next day. I really thought 10 meant 10 next day. If you listened to my responses in that interview, I sounded exactly like Kamala Harris just sounded there. Identical.
Yeah, I mean, some people have made arguments, of course, unsubstantiated, that just as you were a little under the influence when you gave that interview, that there's something to the cadence of her remarks that suggests the same is going on with Kamala Harris. Of course, unsubstantiated and perhaps an unfair claim. But folks are really searching for some explanation because it does seem like someone who's accomplished as much as she has in her life should be able to make remarks without having one of these sorts of gaffes, which then raises the question, and we talked about this at the top of the segment, what do you make of the choice of the Biden administration putting her in the foreground as a weapon against the GOP going into 2024?
I think the GOP is very excited to rise to this challenge of being targeted by Kamala Harris.
It's a weapon in the way that like a pillow fight is a weapon.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's more delusional thinking from the Biden campaign that she is some asset, and also that, and you talk about this all the time, that she's some beloved figure for either women, black people, or young people is not borne out by any actual polling data. It's just straightforwardly inserting her demographic profile. Well, obviously she's not a young. I'm not going to Nikki Haley her here, but she's not a Gen Z influencer, is what I mean. I don't think
she's
that's
past Robby Soave says Kamala Harris is past her. I'm kidding, of course.
I would say the same thing about myself.
No, I take your point. The point is that, I mean, we only have to look to her 2020 presidential prospects, where she came out on a high with 20 million people at her opening launch, 220,000, sorry, at her opening launch, and immediately good poll numbers until she started to actually campaign and exist. And then, of course, Tulsi Gabbard ended her campaign in a very memorable fashion at that debate. And we saw her having to drop out of the primary before her own home state voted because she was polling behind Andrew Yang in California. And my first insights into how her campaign was going to go was seeing what the commentariat said under YouTube videos and Twitter posts about her at the time. So the mainstream was saying that black people loved her and that women loved her, that young people were gonna love her. And I saw under the comments on black websites like The Shade Room and like other like pop culture, hip hop music websites, if there was a post about Kamala Harris, it was a bunch of people, largely local black folks in California, who were very critical of her record as a prosecutor and as someone who had positioned herself as a tough on crime person during a time where that was politically toxic to black people in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement. By contrast, I remember being a journalist as Andrew Yang was first coming onto the scene in 2018, and my peers having a lot of disinterest in covering Andrew Yang, but I saw in the comment section how much enthusiasm there was for him in a way that predicted his relative success coming out of nowhere in that particular race. So I don't see that changing. I don't see people having become more fond of Kamala Harris over time. I think that the media's ignorance about the diversity within the black community and the extent to which there is a narrow band of kind of upper middle class Howard grads, people who were in her sorority AKAs, who are very into representational politics and respectability politics, who are very proud of Kamala from a personal perspective. That does not represent the overwhelming majority of black voters, particularly young black voters and those that are more economically disenfranchised, who don't see her or Joe Biden offering them anything different from the status quo.
Well, we hope that you found this segment had a duality. Sometimes Briahna was speaking, sometimes I was speaking, and now no one is speaking. More rising after this.